All right, we're back. It's a Thursday, and we are here to have a wonderful, interesting, engaging conversation with two guests and a surprise third guest at the end. But first, I want to make sure you know why we put on this event, this Think and Link Brand New World. It's our way of giving back to our global community. We started it back in 2008 in the financial crisis of that time, and to create a place to connect and hang out with people, shake hands, network. And then, of course, this pandemic hits, and we go to this format with our two speakers, our two guests that will introduce themselves in a moment. Kelly and I will go through a litany of questions and discussion topics, but I also want to make sure you know that we are exploring the next evolution as we come back together again in person. For those of you who have actually done the old-fashioned in-person version of this, that'll be coming soon. And this is put on by Capsule, which is a special projects firm here in Minneapolis. We take on interesting brand, marketing, and design challenges. So with that, I will hand it over to Michael to introduce himself, unless, Kelly, you have any other tidbits or notes to add in to the conversation.
No, we're just excited to have everyone here, and certainly Michael and Leah, and encourage our audience members, as we always do. Any questions you have for our speakers, please include those in the chat, and we will certainly try to get to all of those. So again, welcome, Michael and Leah. And yes, Michael, would love to hear some background.
Sure. Very nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me and inviting Leah as well. Really looking forward to our combined conversation. So quickly, by way of background, I'm a former chief marketing officer, ending my chief marketing officer career at Dairy Queen. I then moved on to be CEO of Pearson Candy Company here in the Twin Cities, private equity held at the time. And about 2 years ago, I transitioned into sort of a different way of working. And worked on a startup that COVID killed, working on a few nonprofits, and then went to work for Pinnacle Performance Group as their chief growth officer, doing that part-time. And in the rest of the time, became a children's book author, writing The Legend of Jet the Gerbil. And that's what brings me here.
Thank you, Michael. Nice combination. Varied background. Love it. Leah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. My name is Leah Hernandez, the founder and CEO of Young Authors Publishing, and we are a not-for-profit children's book publisher that exists to share the stories of Black and Brown children. And so we're on a mission to help diversify not only the publishing, the books that we publish, but the publishing industry at large. And I met Michael actually speaking at Breck out in Minneapolis, and that's how we were able to get connected. And he's an author now, so I'm glad that our worlds were able to kind of collide in this way.
Wonderful.
That's
well, excited to, yes, this is going to be a great conversation, a lot of topics to cover. Aaron, unless there's anything else, we can dive right in. I think we're ready to.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Yeah, jump in.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask a question of each of you individually, and curious how your answers may differ. But Leah, I want to start with you. You're obviously, you're leveraging publishing as a model to help kids achieve and learn and really build that confidence, as you referred to. I would love to hear some of the inspired stories that you've heard, you've seen, you've witnessed since you started your venture. Give us a little insight into that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first one is the first book that we ever published, which was kind of the start for me and let me know that we had something special. So we worked with 4 dynamic girls from Vine City, which is a neighborhood here in Atlanta, Georgia. At the time, it was a rapidly gentrified location, and our kids witnessed that. And so they decided that they wanted to write a really beautiful story about the history of their community and what they knew to love growing up. And so that was really special because we were able to see the community's reaction to our children's perspective of what was going on in the city of Atlanta at the time. And that was really beautiful. And then the second story that I'll share is a book titled The Last Call, which was about a young boy who unfortunately lost his father a few months before we started the program. And through the relationship of his writing mentor, which all of our writing mentors are college students of color who aspire to work into the publishing industry. And his writing mentor lost a parent as well. And so they were able to work together, and the young author created a beautiful children's book about all the lessons that his father taught him. And it was a really unique book about how children can deal with grief. And it taught us something really valuable from a publisher, is that our kids want to talk about these topics like this. And the more that we can include them in the books that we have and make them authentic, then I think that our readers will appreciate that as well. So those were the two stories on the book side that stuck out the most to me during this process.
Wow, that's great stories. Yes, very inspirational. It's interesting where we find those sources of inspiration. And Michael, would love to ask you a similar question. Obviously, you're an author as well. What was the inspiration, or give us some perspective on why. Why did you write a book for kids? Why did you choose to write a book, period? And this would be an interesting topic to cover.
Why did I do that? That is a fine question. So there's really a confluence of events. I have had a bit of a creative streak in me, I suppose, throughout my whole marketing career. But when you're in a corporate career, in many ways, it's very hard to express that. And after I transitioned from being CEO of Pearson Candy Company, it gave me some time, the privilege of time that I didn't necessarily have, and the privilege of some resources. So the landscape opened up a little bit for me. And I'd always had a book in mind of some kind. I figured maybe it was a business book, a marketing book, a personal branding book, whatever it might be. But I've also always really enjoyed storytelling. I've always enjoyed children's reaction to that, especially my own. And there was a family story that I had been telling orally for literally 4.5 decades, 4 to 4.5 decades. And when I had the time, that was the first story that jumped to my mind, and I could not shake it. And I realized that given my father's age, and I wanted to dedicate it to my father because he played a major role in the book, I decided that the time was now. This was about a couple of years ago. And I saw, interestingly, we might reference this a little later, I saw a TikTok video that was really potent. This young woman, an entrepreneur, talked about how hard it was to start a business. And she was sitting in her kitchen packing up her soap or whatever she was packing up. She was encouraging people who are following her to stop thinking about one day and just treat today as day one. And in some ways, that's what I did with The Legend of Jet the Gerbil. One day I started scribbling on sticky notes, and the next thing I know, I'm into a 2-year process to publish a children's book.
Wow, that's amazing. Tell us, can you give us a little snippet from the book, just the premise behind, for those that haven't read or enjoyed that book yet?
Sure. So, and I can even flash it up real quickly so you can see I literally am talking about a gerbil. And so this is a family story, a true story, and it's really a father-son rodent love triangle. I love my dad loved me, we both loved animals, and a pretty remarkable little furry fellow who had an unusual and frightening and harrowing experience with a household appliance, sending my father and I off on a fast-paced adventure to find and rescue him. And the fact that my father is a cardiologist, a heart doctor, factored heavily into the rescue.
Sure. That's fantastic.
So not to give it away, but was there any mouth-to-mouth resuscitation at all with the gerbil?
Yeah, there was cardiac massage. So absolutely. And there's some wonderful scenes in the book where my father is pressing on my little gerbil, my best friend's chest, to bring him back to life. The funny thing is, it's funny you asked that question. My father believes that mouth-to-mouth resuscitation was involved. That's his revisionist version of the story. We're not talking about human lips to rodent lips. You actually do that through a straw. It happens with veterinarians all the time. But the reality is it just did not occur. And when I first wrote the book, I actually wrote an alternate ending and actually let the character Jet the gerbil dispel that, but it got too long and complicated, and I decided to leave that to extemporaneous conversation. Classic revisionism on my father's part, but no, there was no mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
Right. Our revised version of history that happens to all of us.
All of us.
That's great. Yeah, your father obviously was also very creative with his memories of that. That's great. So for both of you, as we've been doing this and as we've gone through this timeline of the pandemic and whatever we are in month 18 or 17, I'm not even sure. Part of it is seeing what you've seen through your eyes, what has inspired you, what have you noticed about the community, and in specific ways. What are the things that you've looked around and you've said, because a little bit of this, if you look back historically to the 1920s and the Spanish flu, it was not a lot of people remember that, and there's not a lot of recorded history. There's a lot of missing pieces of what that was, how we must have adapted as human beings during that time period. There's going to be a lot more, hopefully, and then we don't forget the things that have changed and how it's impacted us. So I'm curious from each of you, and Leah, if you want to start with things that inspired you during this 18th month interesting time period.
Yeah, so because I work, my day-to-day is working with our young authors and publishing, I'll speak directly to what we learned from the business. And if you would have asked me before COVID hit to go to virtual learning for our young authors, it would have been an automatic no, because at the time I thought that, in person was the best for creating stories, building relationships with our authors. And I still do believe that to be true, but what surprised me is how well the virtual option went as well. And so we had to completely restructure our program, the way that we work with our young authors and with our writing mentors to go to a virtual platform. And what we found is that our authors actually finished their books quicker when they were working virtually versus in person. And I think there are a lot of factors to that. I think the class structure of maybe some of the community partners, students being able to now work one-on-one with their writing mentor, whereas before they were working with 2 young authors at a time. But outside of all of that, what I truly learned is that kids are really resilient. And I think they probably made it out stronger than some adults have, throughout this entire process, having to be able to attend virtual school. And speaking for the 15 young authors that we worked with during COVID, not only did they complete a book and write and publish a book, but a lot of them still had other extracurricular activities that they were doing, whether that was virtual or at home. So I think that it taught me that our kids can handle a lot more than I think we give them credit for. And that was helpful for us to know, so we can continue to know how to better serve them.
That is wonderful to hear. Yeah, because I mean, that's a beautiful thing to hear, because most of what we've heard is that kids are going to be, a lot of kids are going to be left behind during this time period because of how challenging it was to learn, but they're more resilient.
Absolutely. And I think we have to ask ourselves what the content is that we're going over with our students virtually, and how engaging it is, how personal it is. And for our particular program, each young author had a dedicated trained writing mentor. And so I think for them, this served as the sense of release, to be able to kind of step away from their traditional virtual setting, which kind of looks respectfully very similar to this, a lot of boxes going on, but for a kid's mind, not feeling like they can express themselves or talk. I think that was a struggle. And I think they were kind of able to find that release through storytelling, which, kind of speaks to Michael's point earlier, is storytelling is really powerful. And I think it helps the writer a lot more than we think initially when we're going through the process.
That's wonderful.
Great story.
Michael, what did you see during this time period that inspired you?
Well, as a jump off point, I think we're all seeing right now, one of the things that inspired me, meeting Leah, learning about young authors publishing. And when I had the privilege of time and some financial resources to self-publish a book, I became very aware of that privilege. And one of the things I wanted to do was use that privilege to help with those that don't have that privilege. And that's what actually led me to Young Authors Publishing and to Leah, because so many of the Black and brown kids that YAP supports don't have that privilege, don't have that access, don't have those resources, which is why I think it's so important. So Leah was absolutely one of those inspirations for me. But I do have to speak maybe more as a Twin Cities resident. For those who don't know me, I live in Uptown in Minneapolis, and intersectionality of life and events often is where meaning can be found. So COVID coincided in many ways with the time following George Floyd's murder here in the Twin Cities. And I live near one of the city lakes called Bide-Makaska. One of the things that's been inspirational to me is as COVID has lifted and now living and trying to figure out how to live in the post George Floyd murder era, watching what's happened around this city lake and seeing the city lake explode with families of color, and to see the way that all of us are living and mixing together there, it just feels like that's what a city lake is supposed to be for. That's what a city is all about. And to see white families and Latinx families and Black families and Somali families each enjoying this place that's just literally hundreds of yards from my home is probably one of the most gratifying and inspirational things that I've seen come from COVID. But again, it's that intersection of not only being cooped up and closed up and socially isolated from COVID, so we're getting released finally, but also here in the Twin Cities, we've gone through a lot of transitions and continue to go through them. A lot of people waking up and a lot of people opening their eyes. And it's really nice to see that intersection and the way it's playing out here, at least in some ways. A lot of work to do, but at least one source of inspiration.
Yeah, elegant answer. That is great. Yeah, we're actually located, our offices are located not too far from you, now that I've just discovered that. That's fascinating. And yeah, it is, it has been very, very challenging times, but inspired to see things as it opens up and gets healthier for sure. Kelly, with the next question.
I'm going to switch gears really quickly. I'd love to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and leadership. And Leah, I'll start with you. You obviously had a vision for and then built this amazing organization at such a young age. And then Michael, you've led organizations and initiatives across multiple sectors, obviously, as you described over the course of your career. Can you both share perspectives on some of those key characteristics, we can call them hard and soft skills, that you would say were critical for, or are critical for would-be entrepreneurs, or what you've experienced yourself? And I know, Leah, you touched on even before our call today, some of the pivots that you've had to make or how you've had to adjust to, here was the vision, now it's time to execute, and finding the time to do that. Talk about some of the skills that have helped you both in your respective careers.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. I think the thing that has helped me the most, I often say it's my superpower, is my organizational skills. So I'm super organized, and I think that has allowed us to grow so fast and to do so much with so little. We've published around 33 books and are backed by the largest book distributor in the country. And that's a really hard thing to accomplish. And so I think that for entrepreneurs specifically, you have to have a level of belief in yourself that's unwavering, no matter, what investors or corporations or partners tell you, because they're not going to see the vision as soon as you get it. It's going to take some work for you to execute it, for you to go show proof of concept. And during that in-between stage, it's really important to, like I said, have that unwavering faith, because it's going to be hard. And if you don't have something that's anchoring you, I would argue that it's going to be almost impossible to continue through, because there are going to be so many different challenges that come up. And so I'm grateful that I feel like I made it through that first push. And I feel like now we're at the push of having serious growth and anticipating that serious growth that's going to happen fast. And so as a founder, more specifically as a leader, I'm asking myself, how can I be better for myself so that way I can be better for my team? What does that look like? How do I create a culture that people want to come to every day? I think that our mission is the reason why our team has grown and the reason why people were drawn to us. And now I'm thinking, how do we make people stay outside of the mission? What are we going to do as a company that's going to be different in terms of working for us?
Wow. Yes. So resiliency for sure, but you're also learning as you go at some junctures. So
absolutely. Because before I had and I still do the scrappy entrepreneur mindset where, we're counting every dime, we're trying to stretch it as long as we can. And I still have that mindset now, but I think now I'm realizing that we are in a different place, and our operation should look a little different than what it was before.
That's great. Thanks, Leah. Thanks for sharing that. But having that North Star, right? That guiding vision. I mean, you have to have that, because you're right. There are times when the hurdles seem insurmountable, but if you tie back or harken back to that original vision and mission for the organization. That's great. Thank you, Leah. Michael, your thoughts?
Yes, so some of my thoughts track pretty nicely with what Leah was just sharing. And one of the reasons why I was excited to participate in this with Leah is she is a new and rising CEO. My last role was one, and I've had a career doing a variety of things. And so part of what drew me to Leah and Young Authors Publishing was that opportunity to help in that way, right? Because you can see and feel the energy and the vision there. And so I think that is critical. From my experience, those entrepreneurs that I've gotten behind, whether it's entrepreneurship work going on inside of a company or true entrepreneurship work, that vision is really critical. And not only just the vision, but enthusiasm for the vision that literally spills from that person, emanates from that person, because it's one thing to have a vision, and then it's another thing to share that vision, get people excited about that vision, be able to see what you can see, and then rally support and get alignment behind that. And that takes effective communication skills, and often enthusiasm is nicely embedded in that. I would also say, back to something I said earlier, entrepreneurs seem to be particularly good at that whole one day to day one transition. There's that whole concept of just getting started and getting going. And to borrow a term that I've heard a lot recently through some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work I've been doing, this idea of stumbling bravely. For many of us needing to do a lot of work to become more racially literate, you have to stumble bravely. You just have to make mistakes. You have to learn from those mistakes, grow from those mistakes. Well, I think something is very similar about that for entrepreneurs. There's so much you don't know. There's so much you can't know. Data is missing in almost every circumstance. Resources are missing in some cases. And you have to believe in yourself, as Leah was saying, and that vision, and you have to stumble bravely. You might fall on your face, but at least that means you are leaning forward. So then you pick yourself up and keep going. Our CEO at Pinnacle Performance Group, for whom I'm Chief Growth Officer, she has a very unique vision for this small consulting practice in change management. And it's really exciting to hear her talk about it and get us as teammates excited, let alone those, like say, clients that we serve that understand when they hire somebody like Pinnacle, they're hiring an organization that does things differently and thinks differently, which means it's even going to flow into the type of client service we provide. And again, if it wasn't for her ability to share that vision, communicate it enthusiastically, and get people excited about participating in that, then arguably wouldn't be as successful as they are being.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Stumbling
Yeah,
bravely.
wonderful.
I haven't heard that before, so I'm going to steal that from whomever it originated.
Steal away.
Thank you, Michael.
That's good. So you've both mentioned culture and the importance of it, which you've kind of taken away from my next question to a certain degree, but I want to go deeper into it and the maintenance of it and what you've found has been helpful, not only during this time, but maybe previously, because Michael, you've got a lot more experience on the planet than Leah does, as an age reference. But
thank you, by the way.
Yeah, anytime. But I'm curious about it. How do you maintain it? And then I'm also, is there any way of knowing it? Can you say, well, we've got it? We've got the culture is, or is it an ever moving thing that you just have to continually observe and study and understand, and it's hard to really know? I'm curious about that from your perspective, Michael, because you're with the business you're in now, you're at the center of that. You're doing work around that. So it's a curious one.
Very much so. I'll try to start there, and this might go around a few times because this is a very complex, nuanced concept of especially corporate culture, let alone societal culture as an example. But I have had the opportunity to work in 8 or 9 different organizations, some of them very long-standing, brands that have been around for 8 to 10 decades. And as you can imagine, those brands and therefore companies had well-established cultures. And culture is really difficult to see. It's difficult to manage. It's difficult to change, especially if it is deeply rooted. Younger organizations, maybe not unlike Young Authors Publishing or Pinnacle Performance Group, they have more of an opportunity to craft and grow and maintain their culture that way because they're younger and smaller. Larger organizations are really tasked with some really difficult challenges associated with, getting your arms around identifying it and potentially, and very importantly, channeling it in a positive direction if it's not already going that way. Very candidly, it was a real challenge for me in my last role. Pearson Candy Company, been around for over 100 years. A really well-known iconic manufacturer in St. Paul, and really did business in similar ways for decades upon decades upon decades. And once purchased by a private equity firm, things needed to change quickly. And Pearson, the concept of changing quickly to a firm that was privately held for decades, suddenly becoming private equity owned and having to pivot and to accelerate that way was very daunting. And we talked about that culture all the time. And we spent a lot of time figuring out where and how to change it, including on the manufacturing floor. And that took a lot of time and energy. And it's interesting for me to be able to compare and contrast, let's say, what's happening at Pinnacle Performance Group, where it's a smaller team, it's a younger organization. Culture is everything to Pinnacle, live it every day. And every day we can see examples of the culture being lived out, and the people within the organization call that out. It's like, it's great to see Pinnacle living its values. It's wonderful to see that as an example of Pinnacle living out its values. So when you can describe it and name it and see it, to then talk about it real time is very important, because there's a virtuous cycle there of reinforcing what's positive about a culture to keep it going. As it relates to changing a culture, the best thing you could possibly do, I would imagine, is try to model the behavior you'd like to see in that desired culture, or identify behavior in that embedded culture that represents the future or represents where you'd like to go, and try to really call that out and lift that up as examples. It's, again, so subtle and nuanced. It's very emotion driven. And typically it's created by and led by human example. And so it really takes a lot of, naming it and identifying it to have conversations around it, to make it more concrete and to bring it out of the very subjective realm. So I hope that's some useful perspective, and I'm sure Leah can add more and we can keep going.
Yeah, Leah, I'm sure you can. Take it away.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's the opposite for us. We're startups, so things change every day, and it feels like our culture is ever changing. And so I think, as a leader, I try to find, some type of foundation for us, whether that's through our meetings and through the conversations that we're having in those meetings. I always try to incorporate, because we're not big, we don't have an HR manager yet. And so that's me right now. I wear that hat. And so I try to make sure that we're breaking things up too. And then I'm getting to know our team members just outside of work and what they're doing. Also trying to learn how all of our team members want to grow as individuals and how we can position them in the company to reach their goals. Because one thing that I learned, one of our first ever team members who joined Young Authors Publishing was doing work that she didn't really like. She was working on sales and she really wanted to work on communication and management. And at the time, we couldn't afford somebody to kind of fulfill that role. And so, her and I just had to have a conversation on how we can change our daily responsibility so that way she's doing work that she's great at. Because I think that if team members are doing work that they love and things that they're naturally great at, and there's challenges within that can help them grow, then it's going to be better for the entire company. And so, I think selfishly, as founders, we want to position people and where they need to be for the sake of the company. And one thing that I'm learning is that we need to position them for the sake of the people, because it's always people first. I think sometimes we can get blinded by it being a company and where we're trying to grow and all these great things that we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, we're still working with people. And I think we just need to remind ourselves of that, or I need to as a founder. So.
And I'd like to build on what Leah just shared, because that is exactly the point. So in many ways, Leah is actually expressing, whether it's written or not, one of the core values and an element of the culture of Young Authors Publishing, and it's emanating from its founder or founders. And it's very exciting to hear and very refreshing to hear. So it's maybe not written down yet, maybe not identified yet, but that core belief is so powerful. And interestingly, Leah shared with the CEO of the company I currently work for, the way we operate, it's people first, and it really is around taking care of yourself, taking care of your family. And as a result of doing all that good work, we are then in a position to take care of our clients in the best way possible. The belief is we'll do our best work when we are taking care of ourselves and taking care of our family. And the way we work is nobody works full time. And the reason nobody works full time is because they have lives outside of just work. And what we try to do is help everybody balance their life in work and out of work so they can bring their best selves to work and then ultimately deliver some of their best possible work to the clients because they're coming from a good space. And so that sensibility you have right now, Leah, I would argue actually is already a cultural value in some ways, maybe not codified yet, maybe not listed on the website yet. But I love the thinking and where you're going. And in small organizations, culture tends to emanate from its founder or founders. And it's really important because you're right to be aware because of how much you'll shape it going forward. So it's exciting to hear. It's yet another reason why I'm glad we connect.
I know, and I'm glad because you're always reassuring what I'm doing, and so I'm like, okay, I'm on the right track. I'm doing something right, because some days it doesn't always feel like you're doing things right. Just out of curiosity, is the entire team working remote still? Are you thinking about going back into the office? What are your thoughts around that? As the world is opening back up.
Yeah, it's a terrific question. It ties back to what Kelly and Aaron were asking earlier about what we've seen through COVID. So the organization has grown a lot in 16 months during COVID. So of course we're all remote. Interestingly, technology makes it very almost easy / possible to collaborate, not only within and among ourselves, but also with our clients. And our access to clients in some ways is heightened, and it speeds things up and allows for, in some ways, more interactivity. There are downsides too, not meeting face to face, missing that physical connection. For Pinnacle employees, not being in a room together and having the type of brainstorming and collaboration, arguably culture building too, that might come from being inside the four walls together. But it is interesting that now that we see how this model works, and have for 16 months, and it was forced on us, we're going to be pretty flexible. We're a pretty dynamic organization that way. We have an office. We're trying to figure out how to open that office to let people come together if they want to and when they want to work collaboratively in a way that kind of brings their best energy forward. But it also looks like, especially given that one of the values I referenced earlier, that whole idea of taking care of yourself and your family, for many of our employees, working from home, having unusual hours that suit them and the way their family's kind of rhythm rolls, puts people in a position where they're in control. They're in control of their family life. They're in control of their work life. And if they're in control of their work life, what they're able to do when they're working is not only quite creative, but highly productive. So we are not looking to snap back to what the model was before, but in some ways we were gifted another way of looking at the business. And for us, of course, we have to be very sensitive to client needs. And so we'll constantly try to figure out what our clients are up to, because it's important that we meet them where they are because they're our clients. But we also have a lot of teammates to take care of, and their way of working is super important to us because they have to bring their best selves to work every day for us to generate our best work. So you're catching us in transition, Leah, right now, and I'm going to have to come back to you with like the epilogue to this story.
That's helpful, and I've been having kind of the same thought process of what I'm noticing is that our team members love to have autonomy over their lives and their schedule. And if they want to take a trip to Mexico and work, remotely from there, they have the flexibility to do that. And so as we're opening back up, I'm thinking, practically what that looks like. Maybe the team just comes together once a month for, an in-person work day. And then for the rest of the time, we're working remotely, because it feels like, after the months or the year that we've been in with COVID, I think our team is just now getting used to how to run and operate virtually. And I think we've gotten really good at it. And it feels like it would be a disservice to just snatch that away, as soon as the world opens back up, and go to what was done before. Because that just doesn't seem realistic for who we are as a people now.
I saw to that exact point, I think many of us probably saw it yesterday. I think the CEO of Morgan Stanley was telling his New York employees, when it's time to return to the office or else. And it's hard to imagine, let's say for our organization, and it feels the same for yours, Leah, where that would be the way to go. Also, to a point Aaron made earlier, I'm a little on the older side. I think I'm one of the older, if not the oldest employees at Pinnacle. I think the average Pinnacle employee might be more like 35 to 40 years old. So we're talking about, Gen Y to a significant degree, and Gen Y just works differently, and Gen Z does also. And you got to be careful about imposing baby boomer or Gen X ways of working on Gen Y and Gen Z. And Gen Y and Gen Z are very comfortable with technology and connecting and collaborating that way. So I think you're right to have the sensitivity you do. And I'm very proud of my team back at Pinnacle for having that sensitivity as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it is fascinating how, we're all in that place of trying to figure it out. I hadn't heard the Morgan Stanley, drop of the axe, come back or else. Holy, wow. And what they spent on their office compared to what Apple has spent on that big old circle out there in Silicon Valley, and they're not dropping the axe. They've got all the intellectual property, that's out there in the world. They've got to be more, I would think, more cautious than Morgan Stanley would be. But yeah, it is. Each of these phases have been telling of culture. It's been indicative of culture. As stuff goes out there, you're like, oh, I see what kind of culture they've got. Ooh, right? And that's the kind of stuff you hope stays around so people can see, they did this then, they're probably going to do this again, or behave in that kind of way. Tells you what kind of employer you're going to work for. But of course, they don't go to work for the culture. Maybe they go to work for the money at Morgan Stanley. So anyway, I'll hand it over to Kelly for the next question.
Right. Yeah. And I'm curious, Leah and Michael too. We've heard a lot about empathic thinking, and that leaders now have to have more empathy in the way that they work with their teams. And that, I think, is COVID shone a light on that, but it's always been there. And hopefully that becomes more, it's integrated into the culture of organizations. There's more to life than, and it really sets up employees, I would think, for success, more so than really placing barriers or guardrails around a way a culture should operate that maybe is archaic now. So empathic thinking, we've just heard a lot about that, and I would imagine that applies in what you're sharing as well.
By the way, very much so. I don't know if you've seen a Lexus ad recently. They're actually talking about empathic or empathy-led design.
Yep.
I think that is a big deal. And the work we do really focuses on figuring out how to bring change to the frontline team member of an organization. When you start thinking about the frontline team member of an organization, you have to lead with empathy. You have to think about what they need, what they want, how they'll react to change, what impact change might have on them, because ultimately they need to come along for the change ride as well. And I think, to your point, it's more and more we're hearing more and more of that in our collective culture, maybe also in our business practices. And in this case, Leah, as an employer, and me working as an employee of an organization, it's important to feel heard and seen that way. Arguably, the best results will come when people are feeling heard and seen in the way they need to be heard and seen, right? In almost any context.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. Leah, did you have anything to add there?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that the better we take care of our people, then the better that we're going to see results from the business, but most importantly, people's livelihoods. People don't want to work a job that they hate going to every day, or even clicking online for. And that's not to say that every position has to be like the most exciting and fun,
right.
But I think that there are things that companies can do, small things that we can do to really show our team members that we care and we appreciate them. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with everyone else.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about purpose-driven, mission-driven organizations, which you're both a part of and leading. And we've actually had previous conversations. Mission statements, they're really meant to reflect a commitment to a higher social good for the community they serve. The trick is trying to articulate those shared values with your customers, with your consumers, whomever you're interacting with. How have you both, in your respective organizations, how are you finding human-centered design, brand, the messaging that is associated with your organization to articulate the purpose and mission? How have you found, or what are the success stories you have about articulating those purposes? And then what are you finding is really resonating with your key stakeholders? Who wants to take that one first?
great one. I'll go ahead and take this one. The biggest thing that I've learned is that founders, we may not be the best at articulating it, as the company continues to grow. We recently worked with a brand agency based in the UK to kind of help us, rethink the way that we're communicating. And we completely redesigned our brand guides. We brightened our colors up. We've changed our fonts. We've changed the narratives and the tone, and it's worked really well. And I think one thing that it taught me is that, I don't have to be responsible for all of, having to create the design, because I was doing it for so long and it wasn't working. And it's like, as soon as we got like this new brand voice, this new brand guide, and we started implementing that, we seen people resonate with what we were doing deeper. And for us, we have so many different impact points. And I think it was really hard for us to communicate that. The first one is the whole idea around literacy. Literacy is directly connected to livelihood. And so, if kids aren't literate, then we have to think deeper about the books that they're reading. And then we find that less than 7% of children's books are written by Black, Latino, and Native authors combined. And so it's no surprise that, kids aren't literate because they're being forced to read books where they don't see themselves reflected. And studies show that if children can see themselves, then they're more likely to read and have a love for reading. And so there's that impact point. And then there's also the impact point of the money that we're getting from the book sales. Royalties from the book sales go to our young authors. And so now we're funneling this access to capital and building financial literacy amongst our young authors, because each young author goes through financial literacy courses during our program. And then after their book is published, every quarter when they receive their royalty payment and royalty report from us, they have an additional financial literacy session. And so we're teaching these kids financial literacy and public speaking up until they turn 18. So when they get access to this money to use towards their post-secondary plans, whether they decide to go to college or start a small business at all, or, instead, we know that we've given them the resources and the tools that they need to succeed. And so that's a lot that I just explained, right? And so, in the beginning, we were trying to explain all of that, and we really weren't concise with our story. And so I'm glad that, we're finally in a place where people can very clearly know who we are and what we do, just by us saying that we are a diverse children's book publisher that is trying to close the diversity gap in the publishing industry. And we do that on all fronts. So that's been the biggest thing that I've learned about design and about, tone in regards to young authors publishing and what we're doing.
That's great.
That's elegance.
Yep.
That's really
design and brand, right?
Right.
Hey, Leah.
The only disappointing thing about that was it wasn't with us, but that's okay.
This was months ago. This was some time ago.
Before we met. Okay, before we met. That's okay then. I'm not hurt.
Before we met.
That's good. That's good. Michael, anything to add?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was going to say, as the business grows, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to need someone else to come and tell me how we should be delivering the message. So
we're there for you.
Leah, no pressure at all.
Doesn't it just seem like we should all just be employees of Young Authors Publishing? I think we should all just transition to support Leah. And kidding aside, I'll give a short answer that actually is a link to what Leah is doing, and then answer your question in another context. So where do you find your mission or purpose when you're a self-published author writing about a gerbil, right? I'm doing this for my family, for my father, for my kids, for my creative interests. And early on, I was like, it's not enough. I need more, which is when I locked onto this idea of the privilege I have of being able to do this, which is when I decided to reach out to Leah and Young Authors Publishing, because I'm donating a portion of the proceeds from the sales of this book to Young Authors Publishing to help Leah and her organization do what they do. And I'm just a small independent author, a guppy in a giant ocean. But it was still important to me. And I'm trying to figure out how to share that on Instagram or share that on my website, or, here I am talking about it briefly, right? I'm trying to figure out how to weave that into a conversation, about a gerbil. So there's a little bit of, nuancing and massaging that has to happen there. But also directly to the question, I work for a nonprofit, on the board of a nonprofit called Live More, Screen Less. And their whole idea is helping youth develop a healthy, balanced use of technology. And talk about a mission, right? And anyone who's a parent, even many youth themselves, teenagers in particular, they're aware that there's an issue, and an issue that needs to be addressed. So much so that Minnesota State Legislature has been really embracing Live More, Screen Less in a very significant way. And there's a decent chance providing some funding to help Live More, Screen Less work in the Minnesota community, to work with parents and teachers and school administrators to help, develop that better and healthier use of technology. And so everything they do, everything we do, is being filtered through that lens. And it's when you have it, like what Leah was saying about bringing diversity to the publishing industry, or helping to get the voices and books of Black and Brown kids out into the world. Once you have it, sticking to it and communicating it over and over again, being as repetitive as you need to be, being as persistent as you can be, being as consistent as you can be, is key to building your brand around that mission. And I think Leah's doing it, and I'm really proud of Live More, Screen Less for doing it too, because it just takes a while before the snowball starts to roll. And then you have to have the discipline to stick with the snowball, right? Not go start another snowball because oh wow, snowballs roll downhill, let me build another one. But stick with that snowball and make it as big as you possibly can. It's not easy to do. Many of us get distracted by the bright, shiny objects, right?
Right, for sure. Michael, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to take the chance to take the moment to introduce one of our other guests here, who has a question for each of you as well. She started a nonprofit when she was 8. She wanted to give away books to kids, and she proclaimed that she was going to give away 1 million books. And we asked her in how much time, and I think we came together by the time I'm 18 years old. She's far exceeded that number of books. I think she's currently at 3.5 million books that she's given away to kids and actually all over the world. Books have shipped all over the world. Not to every country yet, but that was one of the goals at one point in time later once she exceeded the 1 million books. And you may have heard this story before because she happens to be my daughter. And I've served on the board and basically have become her handler in the celebrity community, of basically traveling with her to different places. Now that she's 21, I don't have to serve in that role, and which is really sad. She can go wherever she wants. But that's my intro to Maria Keller, and she's going to ask you a couple of, or at least one question, I believe. Take it away, Maria.
Hi, it was so nice to hear from you both. It's been really, really interesting to hear about all your insights, and it's been fascinating. So I just had one question. As a college student, this kind of comes up for me a lot, like how to create a work-life balance and how to live that out. And just because there's so much going on all the time, and so many things calling my attention. And Michael, you talked about how Pinnacle really prioritizes its employees' families and their individual lives and kind of putting that first. And I wanted to kind of learn more about how you both live out like a culture of kind of work-life balance and create that culture in your own organizations.
Okay. Leah, do you want to go first? You ready for that?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. Work-life balance has been a thing for me for a long time. I started my company while I was in school. I was a sophomore at the time. And by my junior year, I reached a point of exhaustion where I was like, this just is not sustainable. Like having 40-hour week credits in classes, plus trying to run this startup and not taking care of myself, I realized that I was going down a path that I didn't want for myself. And so during my time at school, I went through an accelerator program with a company called Praxis, which is a great organization based in New York. They work with Christian entrepreneurs to talk about redemptive entrepreneurship and what that looks like within the companies that we start. And during one of the sessions, one of the speakers said that we really need to honor the idea of rest. And he used the example of Sabbath and taking that one day where we didn't do anything. And at the time, being a college student, when you have papers to write and I have invoices to pay and and books to produce and publish. It was this concept that I couldn't understand. I was in the mindset where I thought that I had to be on go all of the time. And I'm so glad that I was able to learn that lesson while I was in school. And so for me, that looked like Saturday. I mean, it would change every week, but one day a week, I wouldn't look at an email. I wouldn't do anything about, anything related to work. And I built that practice and it stayed with me ever since. But I'm so glad that I took the time to really set that habit for myself. And so now I'm at a point where, that looks like my entire weekend. Weekends are totally off limits from Yap. You won't hear me answering an email or a response or anything like that, because I realize that the more I take care of myself, the better I can show up. When you're exhausted, you have no rest, you don't feel good about yourself, no matter how much you think you're doing, you're really not even doing it at the best of your ability. And so one thing that I would just say is to, figure out what rest looks like for you and how you can do it well. And I think you'll be able to be more productive and efficient that way.
I love Leah's response. And Maria, I think that just the fact that you're asking that question as a college senior, as a 21-year-old, is like half the battle, because it shows you're already aware and sort of tuned into an issue that's super important. So my story is different from Leah's, maybe because of a few more years of lived experience. So I'm a Gen Xer, but I'm the first year of Gen X. So in some ways, I'm a lot like a baby boomer. And oh boy, did I toil over my career. When I started my career at Bain & Company, I was working 75 to 90 hours a week. It's just what you did. You woke up at 6 a.m. and worked until 10 p.m. and you did that 7 days a week. And I spent a little bit of time on Wall Street. I worked for some big global food companies. But most recently and most importantly, since I've been in the Twin Cities, I worked with Dairy Queen as CMO for 10 years. Ended on a Friday, and on a Monday, I started as CEO of Pearson Candy Company, where I worked for 7.5 years. So I had 17.5 years straight of working very hard in those senior roles. And I have a very strong work ethic, and maybe an old cultural idea about you got to work hard. It's important to do. You got to put in the face time. You got to show up. And I think I got trapped in a significant, for lack of a better term, gerbil wheel of constantly running. And interestingly, when I left Pearson Candy Company 2 years ago and pivoted toward this lifestyle and work style I'm in now, I didn't realize in so many ways how messed up it had been. My wife told me I was a transformed human being. For me, it was a little bit more like frog in the pot. I probably couldn't see it easily or as much, but for my wife, she talked about how much of a transformation it was. And interestingly, Maria, in that mode, when I started looking for some part-time work and found Pinnacle, I joined Pinnacle, not because it's change management consulting. I'm not even on the consulting side, I'm on the business development side, but it was because of the values and the culture of that organization that really matched and suited me well as related to where I was in my life currently and how I wanted to work. And so sort of back to Leah's point and to your question, Maria, about what you're asking, in some ways, I interviewed Pinnacle based on their values and their culture to make sure that matched up really well with how I wanted to be living my life now. And because there was a good match, I joined them, and it's been 13 months or so now. And so I would encourage you, not only you're interviewing for a job or jobs, skills and experience, all of that stuff, you have to understand who your boss or bosses might be and their personal culture, but also understanding the organizational culture and what it values has everything to do with how it's going to feel like it fits for you and fits into your life. And so I love that question, and just keep going.
And then the last thing that I'll add in there is hobbies. I feel like, especially if you're doing work that you love, we can kind of get in the cycle of like, well, I do work that I love, and, I just want to do it all the time. But, I think we lost the sense of hobbies as a people. What do you like doing outside of your work? And I remember when somebody asked me that, 2 years ago, I legitimately could not answer it, because all my hours and all my time is being, spent towards building this company. And so I would just encourage you, go back to the things that you just like. It doesn't have to make you money. It doesn't have to, be connected to something else, but something that just brings you pure joy. And even if you can only do it once every 2 weeks, I think just that, that dose of it will give you enough motivation to continue to do it.
Yeah. Hey, Aaron and Kelly, I don't know if you're thinking what I'm thinking right now, but one of the things I grew up hearing as an executive and sort of longed for and almost coveted was finding work that felt like I wasn't working. To Leah's point, right? That if you could find that thing you love doing, it doesn't ever feel like you're working. That was our narrative.
Right.
You're listening to Leah and who has a counter narrative to that. She's like, well, that's a thought, but that's maybe an old thought. Certainly do something you love, but oh, by the way, nurture and develop some hobbies and some interests on the side. You're just to be a more fulfilled, content, and well-rounded human being. Whew, that message just totally in the 80s, 90s, and aughts, right?
Yeah,
so true.
That is so true. Leah, you are.
You love what you do, but it still works. So find a holistic, right. I love that. Leah.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that forward.
Yeah. Leah, you are wise beyond your years. That is really impressive. Kelly, do you want to go with our last wonderful question?
Oh, yes. Fun one. We've actually used the word design quite frequently in this conversation today, but we like to end on a design note. And really wanted to hear from both of you. We like to hear great stories of good design, bad design. Aaron likes to use jank or swank when we describe those types of design. And would love to hear from each of you a story of either jank or swank, good or bad design, and in the form of an experience, a shopping experience, a restaurant, an app, etc. Michael, let's start with you. And then Leah, would love to hear yours as well.
So it's a very creative, unique question. Thanks for asking it. I got a little confused when I first was trying to wrestle with that question. I thought something that was not designed for humans meant don't make it so human-centric. And so I immediately had this experience with, I had an experience on the Mississippi River with a beaver. And I'm like, well, it's got to be the beaver. That thing was not designed for humans, but apparently I was not digging in the right place as related to jank and swank. So I figured it out. And my answer would be one brand, one company that I think actually cuts both ways. It's both jank and swank. And that would be TikTok. I'm a little embarrassed to admit, but I'm a regular TikTok user. I'm not a creator, but I would call myself probably a medium to heavy user. So spend a lot of time there. And that's actually the point. In some ways, TikTok is really well designed for humans because it has turned into one of my more important sources of entertainment and news, or just information and insight, especially some of the things I follow, whether it's racial justice or social justice, or just really interesting people thinking interesting things out loud. So, and then of course the fun stuff like dogs and other things like that I find on TikTok. So that's the good part, but it's also so not designed for humans because it's designed to, in some ways, play on human weakness and our ability to be almost in a sense addicted to entertainment and addicted to the little hits of dopamine or epinephrine or whatever it is you get when you're rewarded by a digital experience of some kind. And I think everybody knows what we mean in today's day and age. And the algorithm of TikTok is designed to both endlessly entertain you. So that's kind of the cool part, really good design, but it's also designed to keep you there. Which is the frightening side, which is why Live More, Screen Less, the organization I work with, they exist because of young people who are having challenges separating themselves from the algorithms of some of social media. So I think TikTok cuts both ways, a good example of jank and swank.
That's an interesting perspective. So you're a good case study for your nonprofit organization as well. How to
think about that all the time. Yes.
Right. No, thank you, Michael. Thanks for sharing. Leah, your thoughts.
So ironically, the example that I was going to get was this museum that I recently went to in Nevada, but I found it on TikTok. So when I was thinking of the name, I had to go back to TikTok really quick to figure out what it was called. But it's this space called Area 15. And why I think the design is so amazing, it's this huge warehouse space. And they have different museums, walk-through museums, some with like really cool neon lights. And they have food spots and restaurants, and it's all these different amazing things. But I think what makes it so unique is that it's an immersive experience. And I think that a lot of experiences, whether it's, going to the mall or shopping or the movies, they can be very mundane. But it was so unique because each different room had a different message that they were trying to share, and they were able to share that story through the lights, through the sound, through the design, and through the effects. And so I think that one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is immersive experiences and how we can create that for people and what that does. And it was hands down one of the best museums that I've ever gone to. And the name is called Area 15 if everybody wants to look into it. So
interesting.
Right. Where is that, Leah? Where
that's
is
in
that?
Las Vegas, Nevada.
Las Vegas, you said that. Okay.
Yep. About like 20-30 minutes from this trip.
Okay.
Yeah. So Area 15, is that like in reverse of Area 51? Is that what they're doing there? Is that
what? I'm assuming so, yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like it was of that ilk. That's fascinating.
You guys should look it up. It's really cool. I know they have like a Van Gogh experience that was one of the things that we do, but they have each room is a completely different experience. But I mean, it's so fulfilling. I think it beats a lot of, I don't want to name any companies, but it beats a lot of other experience driven that really aren't deeply immersed. You know, it's something that you kind of walk through or look at. But the more that you can get people to stop and really experience something, I think that's when you win. And so they've done that.
That's great. Thank you both for sharing. Yes,
that was wonderful. Yeah, and the fact that we just had a very experience-driven conversation at this last one 2 weeks ago, that was very timely. Okay, well, we are at the end of our hour, and I thank you both for spending time with us, and for Maria taking time out of her 3 a.m. schedule for college and her 3 internships and everything else she's doing all at the same time. And for spending a moment in your day to hopefully get inspired and have an interesting conversation. I thank you again for that. And Kelly, we have a wonderful guest coming up, I believe. We're pairing in 3 weeks, right? The 1st of July, not 1st of July, but the first or second week of July.
Week of July, Mr. Guy Kawasaki.
Yeah. Yes, we have Guy Kawasaki on the stage with Lisa Mann from Kind Bars and PepsiCo. It'll be an interesting one. So I hope you all have a wonderful finish to your week and a weekend, and take some time off, relax. What's that? Me time, whatnot. Yeah. Anyway.
No,
all right.
Exactly. Leah, Michael, thank you for sharing your time with us today. Thank you to our audience. We will have recording of this session that we'll be pushing out and sharing with the greater public. So again, thank you all for joining in, and look forward to seeing what happens. Michael and Leah, and your careers moving forward, we'll follow along. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Take care, everyone. All right. Bye. Bye.